This is Mario Party 1 on the Nintendo 64, and it's fair to say this is a pretty random game. It's essentially a board game simulator, so you've got random dice rolls, random minigame selections, random computer RNG, you got this map where you get shot to a random space. There's lots of luck that goes into this game. But what if I told you that this game wasn't actually as random as it seems? In this video we're going to look at how the RNG works in this game. This video is actually a part 2 of an existing video on my channel where I looked at what the maximum number of stars you could get in a single game of Mario Party was. Turns out that in theory we can get 100 stars in a single turn of Wario's Battle Canyon, but in this video we're going to see how realistic that is and what methods go into making a tool-assisted speedrun to make it possible. If you haven't heard of a tool-assisted speedrun before, essentially it's a perfect playthrough of the game, so we're going to be getting perfect luck and manipulating the RNG to do that. But we actually have to just do normal button presses, we're just going to do perfect button presses. So we can't just cheat, we have to manipulate the RNG using methods that are actually possible to do by trying sections over and over again. So before we look into how Mario Party itself works, we should look to some other popular games for examples. Take Mega Man. When you kill an enemy in Mega Man, you're going to get an item drop from that enemy. That's an extra life, for example. But depending on the exact timing of when you kill the enemy, you're going to get different items each time. So sometimes you can get a life, sometimes you can get health, sometimes you can get this blue power up. It depends completely on when exactly you kill the enemy. Now some games will go even more advanced than this. They'll take into account your button inputs as well as when you kill the enemy. So even if you kill it on the same exact frame of the game, you might get different outcomes if you press different buttons leading up to it. But essentially if you're doing a Taz of Mega Man and you wanted a health drop, you could just keep trying different frames of shooting the enemy until you got what you wanted. And that's how a lot of games work. Here's an example of a more modern game, Banjo-Kazooie. You have this quiz at the end, Furnace Fun, and depending exactly when you press the square, you might get different questions. And that just comes down to the timing of when exactly you press A. So now let's try and do the same thing in Mario Party. We're going to hit this dice, and we get a 4. So if we reload and we try hitting the dice at a different time, get a 4 again. And then if we reload and try again, we're still going to get a 4, and then we're just going to keep rolling a 4. So there's pretty much nothing you can do here. The RNG stays the same no matter what, and we're always going to roll that 4 on the dice. So to help us see what's happening here, we're going to use our good friend the BizHawk emulator. This emulator has lots of debug tools, and it can be used to peek into what's happening with the RNG. I have all the watches on the left there, but I'm going to blow up the RNG one up the top here so you can see what's going on. The RNG is at RAM address 0C2FF4 if you want to have a play with it yourself, but essentially it's this big number and it determines what the game is going to do next time it has a random event. If I hit the dice, then it's going to update the RNG, just like that. And you can see it's updated to a different number, so that means the next dice roll will be something else. But you can see pretty much all the time the RNG is going to stay pretty much the same. Every time the RNG gets used, it's going to update. So you can see there when it picked a minigame, the RNG did update to another value. But since there's nothing random going on in this section of the game, the RNG is not going to update right now. It'll update there to choose what Bowser's face is going to be in this minigame. And then there's a couple of random effects that make the RNG change as well. But pretty much there's nothing we can actually do to change the RNG ourselves. Now at this point you might be wondering, well, why doesn't the same thing happen every single game of Mario Party? And the answer is when you're actually selecting a map, you're in this pipe transition, and the RNG updates a heck of a lot here. So depending on the exact timing of when you enter the map, you'll get a different sort of outcome for your game of Mario Party. But in theory, if you could time this perfectly, then you could get the same outcome for a game of Mario Party predictably. One other thing that's really important to note about the RNG is that it cycles. So if my value here is OB8A E467, the next value will always be OA64D214. And that's because computers at their heart are deterministic. It's just doing a bunch of math to these numbers to cycle it through to get the next one, and so it always gives you a predictable next one. This also helps it be subjective onto the space of possible RNG values, or at least hopefully pretty much subjective, which means basically we're going to hit every RNG value in a cycle and then come back to the start. So although it's not truly random, given that there are billions and billions of RNG values, and they all go to a pretty unpredictable next value, it's going to feel random if you're playing a game of Mario Party. Now at this point, most people would jump into the code of the game and have a look at how the next RNG value is determined. From there, you could sort of write a program which predicts the next few dice rolls. Actually, it turns out that my background is in maths rather than computer science, so for me I found it easier to tackle this as if I was doing a science experiment. So what I did instead was I just wrote a program which hits the dice block over and over again and records what the next RNG value is every time you hit that dice block, and then it sort of goes through the cycle of all the RNG values which are going to happen in the game. I wrote that program, I ran it for about a day, and it spat out all these RNG values about what's going to happen next. And you can imagine that if I've spat out the next million or 10 million RNG values, that's going to mean that I can reliably predict the RNG for several hours or maybe even days of gameplay. So essentially this is how I brute forced the RNG in Mario Party. I ended up with this huge notepad document which basically had whatever the current RNG value is, it tells you what the next one is going to be. And then I also monitored what dice rolls you get for each RNG value, because I couldn't really figure out how the dice roll is determined from the RNG value. And now that I got this document, that's how I coded up this big thing that can show you what dice rolls you're going to get. I really want to stress that given that there are billions of possible RNG values, if I got every single one, the file would be many gigabytes big, so I had to stop it at some point, which is why I ran it for basically a day and then left it there. So here's the result of all my research into the RNG. It's this program sitting in BizHawk that will tell you what the next 20 dice rolls are going to be in a game of Mario Party. So this heaps random game just turns into a completely determined game of Mario Party. I'm going to blow up these dice rolls a little bit bigger on the right hand side so you can see them better, and then if I hit this dice block I should be getting an 8, which I do. For example, if I go through to the end of my turn here, Peach is going to roll the RNG initially, and then her dice roll is going to be a 5 based on that table there. And if you see an A in the table, that means the dice roll is going to be a 10. There's a couple cool things you can do with this, like for example when you're starting out the game, what you can do is you can sort of know what the 4 dice rolls are going to be that determines the turn order. So if I hit this dice block, according to my table, it's going to be a 3. But when you start out the game here, the dice rolls are already predetermined to be 6, 10, 2, not 6, 10, 2. They're determined to be 9, 2, 10, or 3. So depending on what order I hit the dice blocks, I might get a different number myself. So I get a 3 if I hit it towards the end, but if I hit it really early, I'm actually going to snag that 9. And if I hit it somewhere in the middle, I'm going to get a 2 instead. And if you have really good timing, you can actually get that 10. So no matter what you do in a TAS setting, you can always make it so that you move first out of these 4 dice numbers. But unfortunately, once we get into the game, there's no opportunity to actually change the RNG before we roll our first dice block. So pretty much what you have to do is you have to get an RNG value and go with it. There are some things that change the RNG, like for example when we start the map in Toads here, the RNG is going to go absolutely crazy when the star appears. Now my theory for that is because the sparkle effects on the star are using RNG, but you can see pretty much no matter what way we skip the cutscene, the RNG is always going to advance the same amount in that, and we're going to end up having 3 as our next dice roll there. Well, not exactly 3 because Wario advances a little bit and ends up rolling an 8. So at this point of the video, I'm going to show you the absolute power of the map Wario's Battle Canyon and why it's so good, especially in a TAS setting if you're trying to get a lot of stars. So the real power of it comes down to where you shoot across to another island. When that happens, a crosshair comes up on the screen and it sort of selects randomly what circle you're going to land on. But you get to choose where you stop this crosshair. So depending on the timing of when you press A, like if we press it now, I'm going to end up this space before Toad, which is really cool. So that gives you a bit of freedom in where you land, but the real power of this actually comes into manipulating RNG. So let's, instead of landing on that circle, we're going to land on this circle here. And then Wario goes up to this Toad space, rolls a red Toad, and then eventually ends up rolling a 5. There we go. But let's suppose that you didn't like that outcome, maybe you wanted something a bit more than a 5. All you have to do is wait a little bit longer, and then you're going to land on this circle again, the exact same circle. We're going to roll a red Toad, and then you can see on the overlay I'm going to roll an 8 now. which is really cool. So essentially what you can keep doing in this map is you can determine exactly what dice rolls you want to get. Now that's so powerful because in a normal TAS of this game, you really don't have much control over the RNG. Once it's set, it's locked into whatever it's going to be, there's nothing you can do to manipulate it. But on this map, you can just keep rolling high numbers to whatever you want, and as I showed in the last video, you can keep circling around and around and around in this map and get multiple stars in one turn, by passing Koopa over and over, and then passing Toad over and over. So when we put this all together, we get this lovely TAS demonstration of getting 3 stars on a single turn, which should in theory be able to be extended out to even 100 stars on a single turn. Now, this is lots of fun to put together, but the RNG display helped a heck of a lot, because that way I could see what dice rolls I was going to get in advance. The main bottleneck of this TAS demonstration, it really is the Toad locations. So Toad's locations are determined when you load the map, and he'll always go to the same spots no matter what you do once you've loaded the map. You can change his locations by loading the map at a different time, but it's pretty much locked in once you've started. So the thing that stopped me from getting more than 3 stars here was just that Toad went into an awkward spot. I could reach Toad, but then I wouldn't have enough movement left to make it past Toad and through to the next cannon on the same turn. But even then, you could get many stars in the one game of Mario Party, even if Toad ends up in a pretty weird spot. That's going to be it for this video. I hope you enjoyed finding out how the RNG works in Mario Party. If you did enjoy the video, then please consider subscribing to the channel to keep up to date, as it helps out quite a lot. Thanks so much for watching.